Hello and welcome to this online conversation. You know, you've met me before, but I want to introduce my friends at My POV Online, who, Donna and Rob, do some really good work in creating space for really important conversations. And we're going to have a really important, interesting conversation that hopefully will start to spark some curiosity. I'm a former police officer from Scotland. I spent my last years in policing working with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit. And nowadays I travel the UK. Most of my work is done from this office just now due to COVID, but hopefully get back out and, sort of training again. I work in the UK and when travel permits in the US as well. I'm a trainer with the active bystander in law enforcement, which I know Catherine's got some. We're going to speak to Catherine today about why the bystander work, but I know she's got some interest in this program. So if you follow me on social media, you'll know that I'm a bit of a bystander geek. Actually, I'm quite proud of that tag. Why? Because I believe in the power of the active bystander. I believe that active bystanders can save lives, they can save careers, they can really help the lives of victims of abuse that bit more bearable. Last year we were all witness to the horrible case in Minneapolis with George Floyd, and an active bystander, a police officer, could have saved his life. And I know here in the UK in recent weeks, we've had some big conversations about law enforcement around a whole range of issues. So hopefully we'll touch on that today. And I feel that people around victims and the perpetrators are there to be engaged. And I think the CDC in America a few years ago talked about how around 70% of violent incidents, third parties witness situations. And I just, my work tells me, my passion tells me that imagine a society where we engage these third parties and help them to sort of speak up. So today I'm speaking to a fellow bystander geek, Catherine Sanderson. Hope she doesn't mind me calling her that. Is a Polar family professor and a chair of psychology at Amherst College, Massachusetts, in the US. Katherine is the author of this wonderful book. This is the Bible for me. Why We Act, Turning Bystanders into Moral Rebels. And when I read this book, it just reaffirmed everything I was doing. It really just gave me a lot more incentive to keep doing what I was doing. So Catherine, welcome to the UK.
Thank you so much for this invitation to talk. And I will say, I had never heard the term bystander geek before, but I'm super honored to be called that and to share that title with you.
Yeah, you're in the club. You've joined the club. There you go. There you go. So listen, in my introduction, I discussed my passion to engage active bystander. My passion came from, interviewing witnesses to criminal acts. And more often than not, people would respond with things like, I knew something was going to happen. I could tell this wasn't going to end well. I remember a few years ago when I was in a prison in Scotland and I was speaking to a man, James, who was in prison for 25 years. And you can imagine what he probably did to get that length of time in prison. And we were doing a discussion on bystanders. And at the end of the session, he came up to me and he said, Graham, if one of my friends had stopped me doing what I did, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be spending time with my son. And it was such a powerful moment. So where did your interest in bystanders come from?
So I was loosely familiar with the bystander work from I was a graduate student at Princeton, and I worked with John Darley, who is a now deceased, but very, very famous professor who was known really for some of the work he did early in his career around what people may remember from their intro psych class, the Kitty Genovese case. Yeah. So John was my advisor in graduate school. And so I was, quite familiar with his work from that. But in all honesty, I have, pursued other lines of research looking sort of broadly at social norms and things during my career. And just about 4 years ago, my oldest son started college, and he called home about 2 weeks after he started. And he said, Mom, a student died in my dorm last night. And he told me the story. And the story is one, that happens all too frequently. A student was drinking, he fell and hit his head. His friends watched over him for hours because they wanted him to be okay. But what they didn't do for 19 hours was go and get help. Yeah. And when they finally did, it was too late. The student died, 19 years old, in his first 2 weeks at college. And as a mom of three, as a professor who works, of course, with many students, I just was struck with how differently that story could have gone if one of those kids had have called and gotten help. And so to be honest, I was in the middle of promoting a book I had done on positive psychology and happiness and longevity. And so I was actively promoting this book on a totally different topic, but I just found myself torn about how could this have gone differently. And so in all honesty, I pulled myself away and I started reading about bystanders, I read about Nazi Germany. I read about whistleblowers. I read about, in the United States, the civil rights movement and lynchings. I read about fraternity hazing. And I just poured myself into this because I just wanted to understand. And I wanted to try to write a book that would help somebody else's kid call 911 faster and get help.
Wow, that's some reason to put pen to paper. And I think it's that why, that I think the why is really important. So tell us about your book. You've started touching on that personal story, but why did you write it, and why did you present so much evidence in the book? I love the evidence. I just love that.
Well, thank you. I will say that I do believe some people have said they love the evidence like you. Other people have been like, so much research. But so I am a researcher. I am a nerd. I am a researcher. And so what I wanted to do in this book was to really unpack what leads people to not act. Because here's the thing. I think we hear, all of us, I think we all hear a lot about people who do horrific things. So I know very recently in the UK, there was a horrible story about a police officer who was clearly, kind of a psychopath, right? Who literally was engaged in some horribly evil behavior. Within the United States, we hear very sadly, very regularly about people who commit school shootings or other sort of mass casualty events. So here's the thing. We focus so much on these horrific acts that bad people do, but here's the good news. The good news is that most people are not luring women to assault and kill them or buying assault rifles, to shoot schools. The original title of my book, and as you've said, it's actually called Why We Act, I think in the United States and in some parts of Europe, and it's actually called The Bystander Effect in some other parts of the world, maybe including in parts of the UK. But here's what I wanted to call it. And you can tell how the publication process went for me. What I wanted to call it and what I submitted it to my agent and to publishers as is The Appalling Silence of the Good People.
Wow.
That was my title. So I always have to say, because to me, that is the point of the book. The point of the book is that there are not very many psychopaths. And that's a really good thing, right? There are not a lot of psychopaths. But there are a lot of appallingly good, silent people.
Yeah.
And when you are a good person who is appallingly silent, bad stuff happens. And bad stuff happens like police misconduct. Bad stuff happens like sexual assault. Bad stuff happens like fraternity hazing. Bad stuff happens like the kid in my son's dorm who died. Bad stuff happens like bullying on a school bus. Again, so my point in this book was to be like, listen, just because you're not a psychopath, you don't get to pat yourself on the back, right? Like, I'm not a serial killer. Yay for me. That's not sufficient. What we need is for good people to step up. And that was, I know, a really long answer to your question, but my book tries to do three things. One, to understand the psychology of inaction, because here's the reality. The psychology of inaction on a bus, in an airport, in a restaurant, in a boardroom, in a locker room, in a police office, whatever. The psychology of inaction, it's all driven by the same psychological factors, whether you're talking about, again, a police officer, a board member, a professor, a teacher, a fraternity brother, a lacrosse player, whatever. It's all the same. And so it tries to understand, it tries to unpack, here's this very normal stuff. And then I have a second section, and that's the first section of the book. Second section of the book talks about, okay, let's get practical about how this plays out. And one chapter examines bullying in schools, which I think is very helpful for sort of parents and teachers. One chapter examines sexual misconduct, again, in pretty much high school, college settings. And then the final section in that chapter, final chapter in that section examines in the workplace. And that workplace could be a hospital. It could be a corporate boardroom. It could be a police office. It could be, a construction crew. It could be any kind. It could be government, in fact. And how that plays out. And then the final section, which I think is the most hopeful, is okay. what do we do? What can we do to give people strategies that they can use to not be appallingly silent?
Yeah, I think, one thing I've really changed a lot in the last couple of years is spending more time focusing on why people don't intervene. And that's what you cover in a lot of your book. And I remember working with one organization, and when they showed me their behavior policy, for example, is that it was a big organization, and it said it was quite focused on people who are affected by abuse and people who commit bullying behavior. But when it came to the rest of us, it simply said, if you witness abusive behavior, you need to do something. And that's all it said. And I just thought, wow, that's just, yeah, duh. Yeah, we know that is the case. And I think it's so important what you do in the book is you present some really good research. You talked about John Darley, his classic experiment with, was it Bib Latané, which looked at social responsibility, that sense of responsibility in groups. Really interesting. And I think when you present, you get that light bulb moment, from audiences who start to realize, yep, you know what, I get that now. I need to do something. I was in Edinburgh on Saturday, and I tweeted about this. I was in the town with my wife in the city centre, busy place, and there was a guy lying on the ground. He was obviously there begging, homeless, whatever, and he was lying just like, he looked like he just didn't look well. He was like head down on the ground, really uncomfortable. There was people walking by doing nothing. And there was a lady, was standing around next to him. She was desperate to do something, but she just frozen by everybody else. And I walked past, put myself in that preparation mode, and I went up to the guy. My wife supported me at the back, and I just tapped him on the shoulder. Hey, you okay, mate? And he went, yeah, thanks for that. I'm fine. And then the lady came up to me and said, thank you for that. Thank you. And I think that's it. That is really what I liked about your book. It really presents these evidence. Now, moral rebels, I love that term, and I'd say it's come from your book. Where did that come from for you?
So that, and I can't take any credit for it. That came from other psychologists. So other psychologists have termed that, perhaps most famously, a professor who's actually a graduate school colleague of mine, Benoit Monin, who's at Stanford now, and he coined the term in an article a number of years ago, and it just struck me again because what we're trying to create are basically people who will just, hey mate, are you okay, right? And so I think, and I love the example you just gave, because often when people hear about the bystander effect, people think, oh, that means jumping into a burning car and pulling out a baby, or that means coming up to, a crazy person with a knife. And sure, those things do happen, but they don't happen to most of us all the time. What you just described, that happens to most people all the time. Bullying, it happens all the time. So I like the example of saying, when you talk about bystander, it's not being the hero, who rescues the dog, from a frozen lake. Often being a moral rebel is just saying like, ooh, you know what? That joke kind of rubs me the wrong way. Or, oh, you know what? You probably didn't mean anything by that, but did you know? Or, hey, mate, are you okay? Right? That often being an active bystander are these little tiny small acts that do make a difference.
Yeah. I think also as well, these little small acts actually prepare yourself for the bigger acts that might be around the corner. Mm-hmm. If we can, I think, what's his name? Philip Zimbardo calls it the heroic imagination, when you start to practice. And I found myself on Saturday, things were slowing down because I've been training, doing this work, and I could see everybody, and I was aware of my own safety. So I felt quite secure there. But no, it's a really great word. When I talk about moral rebels, my moral rebels, Tank Man from Tiananmen Square, the guy who stood in front of the tank all those years ago. I work with so many young people in Scotland and England now who are mentors, going into classrooms, speaking to young people about bullying, harassment. These are my moral rebels. Who are your moral rebels? Who do you look up to?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. So I think about people who I've known in my own life who specifically were always acting in ways that, even if it was kind of uncomfortable or even if it was kind of awkward, they were willing to do so. They were willing to sort of take that charge. I will say, in all honesty, in the United States right now, I am very often thinking about people who are showing political courage. So people who are sort of bucking the, calls for a fraudulent election perpetrated by Donald Trump. And there are people who have, paid a great price within their political party. I wrote a piece, maybe a couple years ago now, a year or so ago, called, Mitt Romney, moral rebel. And, the idea that, there are people who are taking great stands. And to me, when we see people who are doing those courageous acts, it makes such a difference. And again, sometimes they're people who are in my own life, but in all honesty, it's often people who I will say, you took a really difficult personal stand and thank you for doing so.
Yeah. And what can we learn from these people? What can we learn from these individuals, these moral rebels? What makes them like that? I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Well, so that was actually one of the most interesting things to me in writing this book, was actually trying to understand, can we predict who these people are? Because basically then can you recreate it? And so I think there are a few different hints of this. So one, we know that they embarrass less easily. So they feel less worried about, oh, am I going to look stupid or feel embarrassed, or whatever. So I think that's one set of things. Two, they tend to be people who are very high in empathy. They're very good at putting themselves in somebody else's shoes. And that's a wonderful thing. And then three, they also do tend to have models. So one of the things that was so consistent in the research is if you looked at German people who hid Jews in their homes or, garages or barns or whatever during the Holocaust, often again, literally risking their lives, doing so. If you ask them, what did they have in common? You know what they say again and again? My dad was always, taking a stand. My mom was always helping the less fortunate. And so what you see from those people is that basically you learn being a moral rebel around the kitchen table. So I'm a mom of three. I have two sons and a daughter. And I will say that, one of the things that I've loved about working on this topic is talking about this, that talking about it regularly, because I'm hoping to inspire, my own kids to not be the people who would stay silent.
I've really thought a lot about, people in the past who've done these amazing things, and you're right, it's that, I think the older we get, we often conform to rules, expectations in school. Some parents will set quite rigid rules. Peer groups as well. Male peer groups is a big thing for rules. And my reading, I think Irvin Staub's book, which looks at, the roots of goodness, and he talks about, the older we get, the less likely we will intervene in situations. But the good news is we can train people to overcome that, and that's what we do. I read your piece at the weekend on that awful incident where that woman was attacked on a train in Philadelphia. There was quite a bad assault took place, and nobody acted there. What was going on there? Just very quickly, what was going on there?
Yeah, so I want to be clear that there are now sort of disputes about exactly what did and did not happen. So let me just be clear about that, because now I worry about maybe there's going to be some new evidence every moment. But how it was reported was very much that a woman was sexually assaulted on a train and a bunch of people did nothing. In some cases, maybe videoed even. Yeah. So that was how it was originally reported. Now, I want to say a couple things, because I actually think that incident, as tragic as it is, illustrates all of the different factors that lead people to not get help. One, you don't actually know what's going on. So on a train, it's a long car, you're not sitting in a circle. So maybe if you're in the back, you got headphones on, maybe you're not actually aware of what's going on. Is this a couple, is this consensual? Is this a dare? Is this, flirtatious? It struck me in the early reports that they had gotten on the train at the same stop. So that could also lead people to think they are together and that they're not witnessing a sexual assault. They're witnessing a romantic couple. And again, particularly if they are in a distant part of the train. Two, lack of responsibility. Each individual person on the train is like, well, I'm just sitting on the train. I'm just a passenger. I'm not in charge of the train. I'm not the police. And the reports are that the person who ultimately called for help was an off-duty transit officer. So somebody who would have a sense of responsibility. And then three, people worry about the consequences. If I step up and do something, maybe that person has a knife, maybe that person stabs me, maybe that person does something. And the reality is, on public transportation, we can think about stories in which people did the right thing and they were assaulted, they were stabbed, and in some cases have lost their lives. So in some cases, stepping up, even if we know it's the right thing to do, can be hard.
Yeah, I think that's why some bystander campaigns that I've seen, globally and here in the UK, they're well-meaning, but they just say, they'll say, Catherine, you need to intervene, you need to speak up and do something, and we don't cover all of these issues that you're talking about. And it's important that when we're doing this work, we're doing this training, we invest in that time to focus on why you might not act. Most of us would like to think we would do something, but the reality is we don't. In that story, there was a number of men, on the coach as well. Why do you think men find it particularly? I do a lot with work with men. Why do you think men find it particularly hard to speak to other men about an abusive behavior or sexist behavior or something they've done?
So I think there are a couple factors. I think one, there is a real sense of a fear of embarrassment, that we think about masculinity as kind of, the poker face, nothing bothers me, whatever, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. And that's an unfortunate reality of masculinity, that we think about women as being more likely to show empathy. If you look at even what happens, so not even men, if you look at boys, if you look what happens in school settings, boys are much more likely to bully, and boys are much more likely to not stand up to a bully. Girls are much more likely to go over and say, hey, are you okay? And to support the victim in some way. So I think it actually starts young. I mean, I think it's not even just men, it's maleness, that the sense of masculinity means nothing ruffles me, I'm not going to be overly sensitive, and that really kind of goes against the sense of, I am cool and dominant and in charge. So I think that's one factor. I think another factor is, we know now, and this is, frankly, due to research in neuroscience, that feeling rejected by your social group, so feeling ostracized, feeling rejected, etc., feels to the brain the same as physical pain. Stepping on a tack, having a paper cut, burning your arm with hot coffee. And so that tells us that evolutionarily, we're all kind of hardwired to not be rejected. So I think the fear is, if I step up, if I say, cut that out, hey, that's not appropriate, hey, stop it, will I be rejected from the group? And the challenge is, if you're in a group of men and all of them individually might be like, ooh, this is problematic, but they're all trying to do the poker face of, oh, I'm cool, I'm good, you can misinterpret what other people are thinking and feeling, and therefore fail to act, even if acting is what everybody or most people in that group wish you would do.
You brought up that research, that I was intrigued by, that social pain, physical pain, feeling the same. And it's that price that men pay to be part of the group, is to avoid that sense of that not being loyal to your friendship. And it's, for me, it's, how do we start to teach critical loyalty? How do you remain loyal to your friends, your colleagues, but if they do say something, to say, to be able to call them in many ways, not call them out, call them in, have a conversation. Now, I find it really fascinating, that physical pain and the social pain, and how it can be particularly relevant. You talk a lot about that in the book as well, around university students wrongly perceiving what their friends think. And for me, there's some men that commit sexual violence, they often do so thinking they're being supported. So we're at that perfect storm for good guys to do nothing, and the abusers to keep doing what they're doing. In the last couple of weeks, I've supported Police Scotland to deliver a campaign, Don't Be That Guy. It's gone viral around the world. It's really, really amazed at the response we've got, because it puts sexual violence prevention back to men. Rather than blame victims and talk about victims' behavior, we put it right back to men. And in your book, you talk about the need to sweat the small stuff. Now, here's the thing. When I wrote a blog in 2016 using the phrase "don't sweat the small stuff," because in society we are trained not to get bogged down with the little things. And what I was sitting one day, I was in Iowa, at a friend's house in Iowa, and I started thinking about words and language and how do we connect it to other forms of violence. So I wrote this blog, how violence starts somewhere. When I was in Bosnia a few years ago, learning more about the genocide in Srebrenica, what started there, what took place there in a week in July, started with words and language, a bit like Nazi Germany and that sort of accumulation of things. And when I saw that chapter in your book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, I just punched the air that, yeah, I'm there. There's some academics telling me I'm right, so fantastic. What do you mean when you use the word, the term "don't sweat the small stuff," and why is it important that we do sweat the small stuff?
Yeah, I so love that question. So in psychology, we talk a lot about, and in fact, there's volumes of research on this, about how evil acts occur gradually. And so this is a very, very big focus of social psychology. So for example, the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't start with saying, we're going to round up Jewish people on train cars and exterminate them. That's not how it started. It started with little things. Well, Jewish people are going to live in this part of the city. Well, we're going to disbar Jewish doctors and lawyers. Well, we're going to make Jewish people, wear a yellow star. It started in all of these sort of little ways. And so we know in psychology that once you go down a road, it becomes hard to extricate yourself.
Yeah.
The sort of famous Milgram shock obedience study was a demonstration of this. If you're willing to do 15 volts and then 30 volts and whatever, it's a slippery slope, and it's a slippery slope of bad behavior. So that's what struck me. We know, and we talk so much about how, you start heading down this bad road, it becomes very hard psychologically to extricate yourself. But here's the thing. If you start down a good road, that also escalates. And so that's the idea of sweat the small stuff, that many people who ultimately have been convicted of, big financial crimes, they're like, well, initially it was just this little thing. And that's true. But that's an example about how when you don't sweat the small stuff, you start going down this road and it becomes very hard to extricate yourself. So if we sweat the small stuff, it's much easier to say early on, you know what? Not comfortable with this, no, this is, I'm out. Because once you move in the wrong direction, it becomes very hard.
Yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it? It's as someone who's been involved in violence prevention now since all my career, but really focused a lot in the last 12 years. One of the first things I did was to define violence in a way that helped you prevent it. So I started to look at the words and the language, and that's where we can interrupt it. That's important. And you mentioned the policing case in here in the UK, and we had that horrendous murder of Sarah Everard, the young lady who was killed by a UK police officer. And during the court case, we had many details of how this man was someone who made people feel uncomfortable. His language, his behavior. So it was very clear that his attitudes and behaviors were questionable. Way before we had this event. Why do you think people fail to act when they hear abusive language? Why is that, do you think?
And see, that's just such a sad example, because that is an example about how the people who were in that situation who failed to step up, now I'm sure they're thinking to themselves, right? Ooh, if I had said something 2 years ago or 5 years ago, right? I mean, similarly within the United States, of course, the murder of George Floyd, that when you went back and looked at the officer's record who had kneeled on his neck, for nearly 9 minutes, it didn't happen in a vacuum. No one was like, oh, this person's, never had any problems. That was not what we found. And so to me, I think the key is that when there is something that appears to be small, again, the sweating the small stuff, people think, well, it's not that big a deal. I mean, maybe that's, maybe that was a little bit rough, or maybe that was a little bit problematic, but again, and the problem is, if you get away with the small stuff, it escalates, because then you learn, oh, I guess this is not a big deal. There's going to be no consequences. And the problem is when people don't call out the bad stuff, and that bad stuff could be, it could be an offensive joke. It could be a racial slur. It could be, sort of an act of, sort of low level violence, or low level sexual misconduct, sexual harassment versus assault. When you don't call it out and no one calls it out, the person who is doing it gets the message. Yeah. No one disagrees. No one finds this problematic. Other police officers do the same thing. Other fraternity brothers do the same thing. Other people on the football team do the same thing, whatever it is. And so the problem is, as soon as you don't call out that behavior, it reinforces it for the person who is in fact engaging in that behavior, because they're not getting the message, stop.
Yeah. So let's keep the policing focus a little bit just now. And, I'm not here today to make any policing colleagues feel uncomfortable or to apportion any blame. But for me, I want to have a conversation about what I think could support policing. I've just become a trainer with the US Active Bystander and Law Enforcement ABLE training. It's a peer intervention program. You've talked about the George Floyd case. I think after Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans developed the EPIC program, which very quickly had some really good results around building trust, but also reducing misconduct. And I believe you're involved in some capacity as overview of the ABLE program. I love the program. I'm doing my first training next week, so I'm really looking forward to doing that. Can you tell us a bit more about that program, and what's your thoughts on that?
So I love the ABLE program, and thank you for becoming a trainer. So first of all, thank you for going through that training. I went through that training in last year, I think December, and it was just fabulous. And so of course I'm not a police officer, but here's the thing, and you and I actually talked about this at the beginning today. Silence and inaction is the same. It's the same whether you are a police officer or in a boardroom, or you are, a nurse in a hospital, or you are a kid on a school bus. It's all the same. And so here's the thing, police officers are made up of people. They are people. And so the very normal psychology that inhibits action in police officers is exactly what inhibits action in all sorts of other settings. So what I love about ABLE is it takes all of the research that we know from psychology about what drives inaction, what are the problems with it, and how do we combat it. And the training program is based in so much psychology. I mean, you will know the studies. But it plays it out in a law enforcement setting. So imagine you have a partner, who says, let's do this, or hey, let's just write the report this way. Or imagine you come up to a domestic violence call and whatever. So it's taking out, it's applying it to real world settings within law enforcement. And what I think is so very clever about ABLE is that it's not, we often think about police misconduct as the case of, George Floyd, for example, and police behaving badly, and, or the case in the UK and the police behaving like really, really, really badly. But here's what ABLE does that is so clever, and I'm trying not to ruin the training for you, but what it also does is it talks about how when there are bad officers who make bad choices, it hurts the officers around them. Yeah. And so it talks very clearly in the training about a real world case that happened in New Orleans, in which a police officer didn't go through the proper steps of frisking somebody who was accused of a domestic violence incident. And, they cut some corners, they didn't follow procedure. And the suspect, was in the back of a police car, but was not appropriately handcuffed, and managed to get a gun that he had hidden, that they had, again, not found, and shot the arresting officer in the head and killed him.
Yeah. You're right.
And that's just an example, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That case study is very, very powerful. And what I like about ABLE is that it doesn't just focus on misconduct. It focuses on mistakes, but it also focuses on mental health issues as well. All big issues that are impacting on police departments in the US, but here in the UK, officers taken, dying by suicide here. And also mental health is linked to mistakes, is linked to misconduct. So this program is for everybody. It's not just focusing on sexist behavior, racist behavior. It's focusing on all of these issues. And you're right, Catherine, when I joined the police, I was given tools, and you'd think that I would be the perfect active bystander. And yeah, I suppose I was when I was out with the public. But when you face challenges from your colleagues, that's what we need to be helping officers overcome, isn't it?
Well, it is. And and what ABLE does so well. And again, it's why you're doing the training instead of me. I mean, so I went through the training to be sort of supportive. They always have a social scientist, who's sort of there to answer questions about the research. But the thing about ABLE is it's police training police. It's not, psychologist training police. So I don't do the training. I am a person who is there as a sort of resource if somebody has a question about the research. But what's powerful about it is police training police, so that they're like, yeah, I've been there. And so the sort of understanding of, yeah, I can imagine being in a situation. I've been in that situation. And so there's a sense of authenticity and connection and empathy that is particularly powerful because it is police training police.